Hello, welcome to the Grad Ireland Graduate Careers Fair 2020. My name is Rory Cavan, I'm the editor of Grad Ireland. We're here today to talk to you about the pandemic and activities during the pandemic that you can use to boost your experience, your employability, and of course your CV. I'm delighted to welcome our three panelists here today. We have Fiona Hartley, who's a career coach with Hartley People. We have Peter Lewis, the career coach with TU Dublin, and Jill Barrett, also a career coach with TU Dublin. Thank you so much for joining us here today, everyone. Listen, I mean, people are looking for a lot of practical advice these days. They may have had their internships cancelled, they may have had their start of their graduate program deferred, or they may be starting, university in first year or even final year, trying to figure out the direction, and it's especially challenging for final year students. What are some of the activities maybe, or what are some of the things that people can do if they have time, or if they're concerned about, listen, the last few months I've been looking for an internship, I've been looking for a job, I haven't been successful, but I've been doing, volunteering, or I've been involved in, online groups or workshops. What are some of the things that people can use to really boost their CV? Fiona, maybe I could start with yourself.
Yeah, I think this is, people probably have a little bit more time on their hands than they normally would have. And I know college and everything is still going on. But for me, when you're looking for work, it's a sales process, right? And the very first thing you need to do is you need to identify your own unique selling point. So you need to think, what are your strengths? What have you got that the next student beside you hasn't got? And if there's gaps there, you need to identify what are those gaps and where and how can you kind of build on all of your strengths and build on your unique selling point. I think that's the most important thing that you can be thinking about when you're doing a job search. And those unique selling points or strengths are what bring you through your CV, bring you through the whole interview process, and gives you something to focus on. So to me, that's one of the most important.
Jill, I mean, some of the concerns that students may have come to you with over the last few months, what would some of they be, and what would some of those be, and how would they feed into the topic we're discussing here?
Yeah, I suppose obviously it's a difficult situation out there, and it's probably going to be challenging for a long time. One of the things I suppose they would find is that they're probably not as aware of the networking piece. So I suppose if you were to do one thing to boost your CV, in terms of getting it up on LinkedIn and making sure that you network very effectively during this time, because that is going to be the path to building relationships now. Is going to be the path to building, I suppose, relationships into the future and creating opportunities for yourself.
Okay, and Peter, as Jill said there about networking, I mean, you can get people, I suppose, coming to you guys now, very much feeling lost in some cases that the network they were looking to forward, maybe through internships or through their first job, has been, deferred, cancelled, or delayed. What sort of words of reassurance, or in terms of what's the next step they can take to help, and regain their footing, as opposed to making an assured first step on their career path?
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And as said, identifying the unique selling points and looking at developing your network is crucially important. And when your plan has kind of been thrown aside, when it's no longer available to you, it's about taking some time, reassessing, perhaps reevaluating what kind of directions you perhaps have been taking. Maybe first of all, saying to yourself, perhaps a certain route that I was looking at isn't available to me. But does that mean there's no routes available in my sector? So beginning to explore research employers, research opportunities, perhaps beginning to look a little differently towards the areas that I'm in. Maybe I have a long-term goal where I want to go, but in the short term, maybe I explore other options, other types of roles. And so that research piece is really, really important. And there can be a lot more opportunities out there available to students and to graduates that they aren't aware of. So definitely exploring and talking, seeing where past graduates have gone, other directions, I think is really, really beneficial.
And in terms of actual practical building blocks for people's CVs, Fiona, people may think that, maybe over the last few months they've been involved in volunteering, they've been involved in assisting, whether it be, I don't know, obviously online, most of it would have been done, but even pre-pandemic, people would have had a lot of volunteering experience that may not really have considered relevant to their CV. They may have been more focused on what I did in my part-time job or what I'm doing academically. How important is the whole volunteering piece, the whole, I suppose, just getting involved in the broader community piece, which feeds into CSR for so many companies? How valuable is that to people's CVs, Fiona?
It's unbelievably valuable, especially in certain jobs. For example, say people want to go into teaching, for example. If you've got experience on coaching on teams, and maybe you've coached some younger teams and coached clubs and whatever, that just shows skills that you've developed. And we always talk about these transferable skills, but they are so important on a CV, especially for somebody who's starting off fresh. Like I always, when I'm doing CVs for students, it's nearly more a skills-based CV than it is a biographical CV, because a lot of them don't have the experience that they need. So you need to be able to pull on that voluntary work that you may have done. And as I said, things like teaching, you might want to go, help out with some coaching. Maybe you want to go down a business route. Is there anywhere you can even volunteer in an office and help out? That just shows that you've got initiative, but it's also giving you those transferable skills that you can talk about.
And Jill, and just building on what Fiona said there, like in terms of transferable skills, maybe people going into computer science who may have, starting their career in that area, but who haven't got the experience that maybe wanted. But there are online resources, coding, collaboration, things like that. And, this doesn't just apply to computer science, but of course, many other disciplines. How can you highlight things like that? It may seem very small to you that you worked on developing a project with people with similar interests online, but how can you help shape that to an employer in terms of, this is something that I started, I identified objectives and we completed and show it in the best possible light to employers?
Yeah, I suppose, obviously, you're sort of the competency-based questions that we're all guiding students in, or in terms of how to describe your skills to employers. It's really important that you go through each module that you've done, each project that you've participated in, all of your extracurricular activities in college, and just identify the soft skills. Most career services like ourselves in colleges and career development centres will have great resources to help you. We have a great sheet ourselves, sort of action verbs and action phrases to help you in terms of articulating those. And so it's articulating the skills, I suppose, in the first place and identifying them, and then having a bank of stories to tell around that. So as you described there in terms of your coding, your projects, being able to tell the story around it. And something else just to mention, I suppose, to add on to what Fiona said there, just in terms of the volunteering. Other great ways to build your CV. So for example, if you're a computer science student, you might be missing out on pieces like leadership, for example, or I'm thinking just some of the softer things like emotional intelligence, maybe a language. So this is an absolutely fantastic time. And I did some interviews with graduates of our own university recently, and they said, look, you can see this as a bleak time or just a time of great opportunity. And, never has there been, such an opportunity for people to just actually, not work because the work mightn't be there, but to build up the other side of themselves. So do a leadership course online, get another language. If you have a language already, then, ramp up on that one and maybe look at getting a second one. And also, again, around the, if your course or your program doesn't have a numeric element to it, maybe you might do a basic accounts package or something that will help to prepare you in a rounded way for the opportunities. Because the reality is, whether it's an internship or whether it's your graduate career, you mightn't get exactly what you want immediately, but you can be working towards that. In the meantime, you might have to take other opportunities that arise, and in doing all these extra things, you can build up sort of those extra strings to your bow, as we say, to make yourself more employable and more work ready.
Peter, just what Jill said there about creating more the entire employability package when it comes to how you put all your skills together and your attributes. I know the soft skills are a huge part of what you guys do now as career coaches. Factoring in things like emotional intelligence, empathy, all these things that help you how you portray yourself to employers. And I know over the last few months we've all spent a lot of time communicating through packages like this. And every year in our own Grad Ireland research, communication is the number one issue for employers. That they find some graduate recruits lack the ability to speak and to write in a clear and concise way. How important is communication, and how much does it form in terms of your own advice to students when you're helping them, prepare for interviews and jobs?
Yeah, it's absolutely at the very core of what we do, because in terms of working with students, we find that graduates, I tend to find that they massively underestimate the level of capacity and the skill development, as Jill has mentioned, and Fiona's mentioned, in terms of what the kind of activities they've been involved in college, in work experience, and so forth. So first of all, it's identifying those elements and realizing that evidence is there, that they have experienced elements of leadership, that they have been adapting to situations, overcoming challenges and problems, and having to communicate and work in group scenarios that they may never have realized in doing that. And then the articulation piece, the communication piece, both in CVs, in your applications, in your interviews, is absolutely core, because then when the realization is there, you have to have the words necessary and the realization, and use the language and the terminology and connect what you've been doing to the roles that you're applying for. And that can very much mean, again, back to the research piece, looking up job specs, looking up job profile websites such as Grad Ireland and elsewhere, and actually identifying what are the core skills that are being sought in the areas that I'm looking for, and then knowing that I need to probably reflect and articulate those and connect what the employer is looking for, and connect that to what I've written and how I've written it in my application and how I'm communicating it in my interview. So it really is vitally important. Back to the point about volunteering. Volunteering is hugely valuable. You're doing developing huge transferable skills, both as part of COVID in the community, but as part of societies and clubs in college as well. But you need to be able to help the employer, help them to understand how you've developed skills, where you've developed these skills, and why your experience is relevant for their roles.
Thanks, Peter. And one more piece that always pops up every year is, in terms of shortfall graduate skills, is foreign languages. Obviously, so much work in Ireland and, in so many sectors is, you're working with your local colleagues, you work with international colleagues. There seems to be kind of a belief that, I need to be learning maybe Chinese, I need to be learning Japanese, I need to be learning such and such. Fiona, from your own experience, what are the languages that employers are still looking for? What are the most common ones? And any resources that you may be able to point students towards in terms of assisting them portray this best in their CV?
Yeah, now I'm going to come at it from the southeast perspective, okay, which is going to be very to people in Dublin, right? In the southeast, just with the industry that we have, outside French and German, there isn't a huge requirement for other languages. We would occasionally, Nordic is one that you might get, or Portuguese that you might get, but our industry is very much pharmaceutical based and call center based. When you get to the more kind of tech companies, like the Googles, like the Facebooks, and the more kind of international companies, I know that there are more language requirements there than we would have down here. And possibly, Jill or Peter, you probably know better in Dublin what it's like from a perspective of languages there. But really, it's the French and German are the two that would be looked at here from a pharmaceutical.
Sorry, and excuse my absence there. The connection just dropped. Happens. So, as you mentioned there, Fiona, and just get your own views on this, Jill and Peter. French and German are still the core of what a lot of employers are looking for. Would that be reflected in your own experience, Jill?
Yeah, it depends really, I suppose. A couple of things. The first thing is obviously we're a trading nation, so in terms of the language, if you have and want to pick up an extra language, think about the sort of places that we trade with, or the places that you might want to work eventually. But we've all come through, or most of us have come through, as in the panel today. People listening won't necessarily have that experience. It might be that English is not your first language, in which case you need to ramp up on that, and certainly there would be evidence in our own core students in TU Dublin that maybe some of the students struggle. They might have got into a program, but they're actually struggling with their verbal command of English, and that's really important. But as a sort of a student who has English as the first language, any other foreign language is going to benefit you, both in terms of the development of your brain, how employable it makes you, how connected you become with other people. And just to give you two very small examples, I was at an IDA seminar years ago, and they said, look, even if you only have a couple of words or a couple of sentences in the language of the person, the native language of the person that you're speaking to, it makes such a difference. It helps them to connect immediately. I was giving a seminar to a Russian delegation a few years ago, and all I did was say, hello, you're very welcome, and my name in Russian. And they started clapping, and they were taking photos of my slides. They connected with me on LinkedIn. My first apartment in college, I got it because the person who owned the apartment was French, and she didn't have much English, and I had some French because I had been on a stage in France. So any language is beneficial. I mean, Chinese, obviously you mentioned there, is the most spoken language in the world, but it might be a bit complicated, do you know what I mean? But the next one, obviously English, and then coming up after that, Hindi. Certainly a lot of the Indians that work in Ireland, they have fluent English. They're more fluent than we are ourselves. So Spanish should be the next one, But even if you've just got a bit of French and German, whatever your language is, ramp up on that. It's going to make you very, very employable to have a language. So, to use this time. And Duolingo is a great free tool. You were just asking there earlier about tools, and maybe Peter might know some other ones as well that you can use. Duolingo is free, really easy, loads of online stuff you can do to ramp up on your languages.
And Peter, I think that kind of builds on what you said earlier on about how to best display what experience you have, or whether that be volunteering or whether that be languages. When you're looking at your CV and thinking, right, where do I even start with this? I want to, the first employer is going to go to, they're not doing their graduate program or their internship. I'm going to look at this employer. When you're starting your CV again from scratch, how important is it to, or what resources might you be able to point us towards, even in terms of updating, crafting your CV? Like, what are the kind of must-dos? What are the top 5 you should do if you're starting with a blank sheet of paper? And I'll go round to Fiona and Jill afterwards on this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I say the first thing you do is obviously do a little bit of self-reflection and self-awareness, and begin to identify, as Fiona mentioned earlier, about identifying what your unique selling points are. So before you're even getting to the point of thinking about what an employer is looking for, try to be more aware of what you have to offer, what are your core skill sets, your strengths, and your drives that really set you apart and differentiate you from other candidates. Then, as I mentioned, do research. Explore the opportunities that are out there, explore the industries, explore the companies that are in your sectors, and identify what are the strengths they're looking for, what are the skill sets they're looking for. And when you're building, then you begin to kind of sort of a semi-matching exercise in terms of you're trying to communicate what you have to offer and where your strengths lie, and communicate that specifically to the employer, so they know that you have what they're looking for. And that's really, really important to do that, and again to use the language that they're using as well. Sometimes in terms of applications, people tend to dumb down applications, make them too generic and so forth. So use the correct terminology. Make sure to tailor your application also as much as possible. If you have a top 10 companies or top 10 jobs you want to apply for, you really should be thinking about tailoring your application, using the specific language and guiding it towards those specific roles, so that the employer, when they read it, they feel that you're talking specifically and directly to them, and that you're really motivated to want to be with them. So I think there's some of the probably the core elements that you would start with in terms of an applications. One last point I would make, there's wonderful tools out there, career development centers and so forth have lots of guides and information, perhaps templates and so forth to guide you. So very much engage with your career services. There's a lot of templates out there that are excellent too online. One caveat about that is just be a little careful about when you use a template that you might be actually trying to fit your life and your experiences into somebody else's design structure to a template, and it mightn't be actually communicating and I suppose selling you in the way you'd like to sell yourself. So at the end of the day, great templates there, but just make sure that it's covering and presenting the information in the style that you want to present.
And Fiona, there's people probably likely watching this webinar today who have maybe been working for a year or two, and they're moving on to the second job, or maybe their contract is finished and they want to change career direction. Would you advise as a point where you constantly modify your CV, or is there a case to be made for starting from scratch if you're looking at changing career path or moving on to that, a second job which may be considerably different from what you've done previously? Would you restart or reboot your CV?
Look, I suppose it depends. Are you going from a job that's similar to the one that you've already been in? Then you're just adding. But I mean, to say what Peter has said again, every job you applied for, your CV should be different. You shouldn't. Employers are all looking for different things, and you need to match your CV. Like when I'm doing CVs, I look for three things. Okay. The first one is that it is targeted for the role that you're applying for. So you need, as Peter said, do the research and make sure that you have all the information that they're looking for, that you're basically mirror imaging what the employer is looking for. So no matter whether it's a first job, second job, third job, you should be changing your CV for the job that you're applying for. The next thing we would look at is make sure it's high impact. I know from going through CVs, and I'm sure many of you have done it, nobody reads a CV word for word, unfortunately. It gets an initial glance, maybe 15, 20 seconds, and then the reader will decide whether they're going to read it or not. So you need to make sure that your CV on an initial glance, it looks nice, it looks professional, and the words that you want to pop out of there are popping out. Things like titles, sometimes titles in a job, you could have been, I don't know, a sales rep, or you could change that maybe to business development. It just make sure your title is reflecting the jobs that you're going for. It's one of the first things people look at. But as well as that, the key skills that we've been talking about are standing out. And the third thing that makes a CV stand out is achievements. Have you got achievements that other people don't have? Have you identified ways of improving a process? Have you saved money in the last job you were in for the employer? Have you grown the...
Hello? Fiona, you broke up there a little bit there, Fiona. Fiona?
Me? Sorry.
It's okay, Fiona. It's all right. We're stopping to ourselves today.
Yeah, but where was I? Was I at the...
Yeah, no, basically by demonstrating the achievements, and I suppose that is at the core of what you need to do to make every CV, every cover letter relevant. And like Jill, a lot of people now it's not, there was a time when it was a CV and a cover letter, and we knew what the rules of engagement were, so to speak. Now you're dealing with ATS, application forms, so many different tools. Would you have any quick tips for graduates and students, like if they are applying for a job that they know is going to be screened, that in terms of keywords for your CV, any words of reassurance or key tips that they should bear in mind?
Yeah, well, obviously you need to get those buzzwords in there. So I mentioned those sort of action verbs, words and phrases, resources that certainly we have in our centre, and I'm sure a lot of you can Google them anyway, and just to find out what are the key competences. I mean, obviously you're going to look at the job spec or the application for the role as in the advert, and you're going to pick out all of the. I mean, it's actually interesting sometimes when we're working with clients, we discover they're sort of going for an interview, or they've thrown together a CV and they haven't even looked at the job spec or the job description. So that's your first point of reference, is look at the job spec, see what's in the essential department and see what's in the desirable department. So the essential, we hope, is the communication or the skills that they're looking for, the highest priority. So you need to give priority to those in your CV, in your cover letter, and then mention as many of the other verbs and phrases as they have, because that's going to make it more likely that it's picked up on those tracking systems, as you say. But I think a huge amount of Irish employers and internationally are still relying on a CV and cover letter, and there is a human looking at it. So not to forget about that. Fiona mentioned the point of impact there in terms of making sure it's really well laid out, you know, using your emphasis very carefully. Peter mentioned just the basics, you know, certainly Ireland, UK, a 2-page CV, absolute maximum. And some people like a 1-pager, but as long as it's doing what it needs to do, 2 pages, relevant information only, prioritized in order of interest to the reader. So you have to step into the reader's shoes, regardless of whether it's a tracking system or a human. And in that, just make sure that you get, you know, as much as you can of what they're going to need to see on the first page. I mean, it sounds a bit bleak there, what Fiona said, but it's absolutely true. And I think, Fiona, that's your background again, sort of, you know, from a recruitment perspective. You know, absolutely making sure 100% that the person engages and is interested in you immediately, because we all know what it's like, you know, Rory, you know, you're sitting there with your phone, and if you don't see what you like, you know, you're on to the next thing. You scroll, swipe, whatever. So it doesn't, that rule doesn't change with the CV and the cover letter.
I'm conscious of time here. I don't have much of it left. We've had a good chat, but Peter, I want to just wrap up by some words of reassurance for students and graduates in terms of what they've learned in college, and the belief in the skills they've acquired through their coursework and through any other experiences that they've gained. You know, and you know, we know from our own research that, you know, employers do value very much the skills that students come from Irish institutions with, and that they compare very favourably with any institution anywhere. So if you were to talk to some of your students today who are logging onto this Graduate Careers Fair and are going to be logging on to many other, you know, virtual fairs, which is strange in its own right, you know, what sort of words of reassurance could you have for them in terms of, you know, where they stand in terms of how they appeal to employers and what their core skills are and how they can best promote themselves?
I think a core thing, I suppose, and we ran surveys with employers over the last number of months, and one core thing that they do to reassure students and graduates is that this will pass. You know, that the deluge, the craziness will pass. Maybe not in immediate future, but it'll certainly ease. And also to remember that there's opportunities out there that you may not be aware of. So don't shut down. Stay connected. Stay reaching out, and realize that all those activities you've gotten involved in, be they sport, be they societies, be they work experience or interest or communities or causes you've been involved in, all of those hold huge relevance and are really, really interesting and important to employers. So make sure to communicate those. And I always say to my students, I hate to hear the phrase, sure, it was only. I remember talking to somebody who worked on a farm from an early age, and it was just that was what the family did. And then when I talked through from an early age the level of responsibilities, technical skills, and responsibilities that individual had, and they dismissed all of that experience just because that was the family, and I can't really talk about that. So you need to dig deep and do some reflection and realize you're much stronger than you possibly think you are. And that will really help you going forward. And you have to give yourself permission to sell yourself. A lot of other countries laugh at the Irish when they undersell themselves and they kind of go, and it was only. So you need to put that on paper if you want somebody to understand what you have to offer.
Fiona, would you like to add to that in terms of really good points Peter made there about, you know, giving yourself permission to sell yourself, to really invest in what you believe about yourself and how this will appeal to employers? What would you say to students and graduates in terms of reassurance and, I suppose, let's hope, some notes of optimism for the future?
Yeah, and I mean, this is, I think it's a particular problem with Irish people in general, is they're too modest to sell themselves. And what you have to understand is, unfortunately, this is a process where you have to step outside your comfort zone and sell yourself. And still be yourself, though, because you don't want to try to be something that you're not. So you just have to be the best that you can be. Just on a positive note, just from a recruitment perspective, I know that we're in a recession at the moment. What I know from recruitment, it's quite strong at the moment, would you believe, especially for anybody in the professions such as engineering or accounting or whatever. So the thing is not to panic. it's going to come round, and people are still hiring. It might just take a little bit longer, but those jobs are there at the moment, despite all the bad news that we're hearing. And we've been particularly busy over the summer, which is always a good sign.
That's good to hear. And Jill, in terms of, as Peter said, and as Fiona said there, that, this will pass at some point, hopefully in the not too distant future. But obviously students and graduates are going, yes, it will pass, but it's just so happened at my time when I'm looking to, make that step. So they have to deal with setbacks at a point when they may not have been anticipating them, which is generally when setbacks happen, let's be honest, at any stage in life. So in terms of how they can, fortify themselves in terms of resilience, what words of encouragement or reassurance would you have for students and graduates?
Yeah, absolutely, Rory. And I think today is a great example. I mean, this virtual fair where they're going to have so many opportunities. And I know each of us in our own universities, and Peter, my colleague there, and some colleagues who are running discipline specific, and some of the sectors that are very strong, others are not. I suppose in terms of just appealing to everybody that's going to be listening today. So of course, it's not all Irish students or Indigenous Irish. We've got a huge amount of international students. The whole confidence and how we put ourselves across thing is not unique to Ireland. It does affect many cultures, and I know a lot of my students would experience it. So it is to remember that you are a unique individual and you have a unique set of tools and competences, and whether you're a mature student or a young student coming out of college and all the learning that you're engaging in at the moment, that is just going to sell you in bucket loads, because you have all this new knowledge and experience and a recent experience. And also for the younger students, I mean, you have all those things on your side, youth enthusiasm, everybody loves getting, new people into their teams because it's so invigorating. And for the more mature students and people with international backgrounds or diverse backgrounds from socioeconomically disadvantaged areas, everybody brings so much to the table. And I think just to remember as well, I speak personally, but I'm looking around our panel today, and we're all white Irish, and we're all of a demographic, so we're all of an age. So we might have a mindset, and having come from famine and all this bleakness in the past, these memories, of course, we came through those, and that's a great generational advantage that we have, I think, in Ireland, that we have experience of coming through that. But also what I'm struck by is that the clients I deal with at student level, they don't necessarily have a sense of foreboding around, they still are going out, applying for the roles that are there, networking. One of my students has gone off to London this week on the basis of a LinkedIn chat I encouraged her to have. She's just determined to get a placement with that agency, and she's gone over, and that's what I'm seeing. So I think, there's loads to be optimistic about there, and there has never been a better time to say that you came through a time like this and, grew and shone is just, it's going to be a testament to all those students and graduates.
Thanks very much, Jill. That's very, I think they're very strong words to finish on in terms of, reassurance and motivation that, to be able to say that you strived, you succeeded, and you dealt with setbacks during a time like this, which we will all remember, is something that will stand to you in the future. Listen, we're totally out of time. So thanks again to my panel. Thanks to Peter. Thanks to Jill. Thanks to Fiona. Really do appreciate your time here today. And just reminded that if you are logged into the portal, which you will be if you're watching this webinar, to make sure that you avail of the expertise we have from our AX colleagues at our CV clinic. So please make sure that you log into that and try and book your appointment as soon as you can. Thanks again to you all for joining us here today. All the best.